Welcome to the Why on Earth Community Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron William Perry, and today we're visiting with Jared Meyers, the chairman of Legacy Vacation Resorts and uh, pinnacle leader in so many amazing efforts underway that we'll be talking about. Jared, welcome. It's so great to have this opportunity to visit with you today.
Well, thank you for having me, Aaron. I'm excited to talk with you, share a little bit more about the good, fun work that we're doing.
Really looking forward to it. Jared Meyers is a values-driven professional utilizing his time and resources to improve social, environmental, and economic conditions through certified B corporations, B Corps, and the Business for Good movement. He believes we can co-create a better and more resilient future by supporting organizations and people that seek a shared and equitable prosperity for all. He accomplishes this as a founder, investor, and lead executive of several carbon neutral B Corp businesses, which include Legacy Vacation Resorts, Salt Palm Development, and Climate First Bank. These B Corps operate in Florida, Colorado, Nevada, and New Jersey and serve at least 300,000 customers annually and regularly achieve some of the highest positive stakeholder impact in their respective industries. Excuse me. This past year, just recently, Jared was recognized as one of the top 100 impact CEOs in the United States, and that's by Big Path Capital, their Momentum 100 recognition, or Mo 100. And as a matter of fact, we know Jared was ranked number 23 in the most recent round. He stewards the For Good movement, the Florida For Good and Be Tourism business communities, serves as co-chairman of Be Local Florida, founding steward of Be Lab, a global economic and environmental opportunity fellow at the University of Central Florida, and co-chair of the East Central Florida Regional Resilience Collaborative. He's also a partner in change for the Transformational Travel Council. And when he's not working, and I am pretty clear now that he's working quite a bit of the time, when he's not working, he enjoys sports, being an involved dad, and actively traveling with his wife of 22 years, Christy, and their two children. Jared, you've got so much going on, for somebody like me interviewing you, it's almost like, where do we start? But I want to I want to start with a very broad, open question for you. You've got a business background, finance management. You've got a lot of skills and capabilities, clearly. Why are you doing what you're doing now instead of all the other things you could be doing?
That's a good question. I do what I'm doing now because it aligns closest with who I am, like at a very core individual level. And all the things that you touched on sounds like an awful lot, but the truth is there's a very common thread through all of those, and that is trying to maintain a sense of alignment in who I am and what I do every day. And so every business interest that you talked about or network that I'm a part of allows me to be more human and doesn't allow me to say, well, that's personal and that's business and those are different. I'm able to treat them like they're one and the same. And so I'm very lucky that I'm at a point in my life where I can live that way and be consistent, from when I wake up till I go to sleep. And the B Corp community that I'm a part of is just a very natural space for me to operate within.
It's really, yeah, really inspiring and really wonderful. And you're hitting on something I think that is so core to both many of the systemic challenges we're facing as a society worldwide and some of the greatest opportunities that are emerging in these times. And what I'm hearing you speak to is integrity in the deep sense of the term integration, when things are integrated. And it's very interesting to hear you speak about not having a separation or a perceived separation between what's business and what's personal. And of course, the cliches are many. Oh, don't take it personally, it's just business, right? And whether we're thinking about a history of slavery or some of the other systemic injustices that many of which are still very alive in our world, that notion of don't take it personally, it's just business may in fact be a deep pathological set of behavior patterns. What do you think about that?
I would completely agree. I think that almost every issue we face, as complicated as they are, it's really simple at the end of the day. It's that when we see ourselves as different from other people, then we can justify why differences exist. And then when we see ourselves as one and the same or similar, it's a lot harder to accept those differences, whether that is economic differences, whether that's privileges in my life, whether that's access that I had that others don't have. Again, if they're different than me, I can justify a ton of reasons why things are as they are. If I see them as me, it's much more difficult. And so I think a separation between business and personal is one of those ways that that's the case. Race is another way that that can be carried out. And I think there's a variety of ways that Homo sapiens, that humans have found ways to draw these distinct differences to create more persuasive arguments for things being the way that they are.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And clearly, with the work that you're doing at Legacy Vacation Resorts, at Climate First Bank, and elsewhere, you are really helping lead the way, transforming what business as usual means and looks like. And I'm hoping, can you just walk us through what's different about the approach you're taking and the work you're doing at Legacy Vacation Resorts, vis-a-vis relative to versus all the other many tourism oriented and hospitality oriented brands out there?
So at the highest of levels, it's that we don't pursue profits at all costs. We don't say, well, in the name of profit, all these things are acceptable. We'll pay as low as possible in form of wages, or we will use clever marketing to get people to stay here, or engage in just a variety of other practices that can occur within the travel and tourism industries. We view our role differently. We view that if we do things the right way, which I can define further, we will be profitable. And it won't just be profitable, but it will be more sustainably profitable in the sense that since we're not taking advantage and exploiting and extracting in the process, our guests will want to return. Our employees will love to work here. Our communities will welcome us and want us to stay here and support us in different ways. And nature itself will continue to flourish and support us instead of maybe react in ways that it does when we take things that are harmful, to nature. So it's just a very kind of shared prosperity orientation. And then obviously we carry that forward with a lot of individual logistical steps to get there that make us different.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wonderful. And I know that it's a very long list of practices and activities that you're employing at Legacy Vacation Resorts. And I'm very struck by the degree of engagement and leadership that you have with the B Corp movement. And of course, I've taken a company through the certification process myself. I understand that when one goes through the B certification process, this is not, simply saying, hey, we want to do good, and the response is great, here's your certification. Instead, it's a rigorous assessment process looking at all sorts of categories and domains of impact, from workforce and employees to environmental impact, supply chain impact, customer, other stakeholder impact. Can you walk us through and explain to us how that framework has been developed and how you think about it, especially with Legacy Vacation Resorts?
Absolutely. And I'll point out they're actually going through adjusting the framework presently into a newer variation based on just change that happens in the world. These standards can't stay fixed as the world changes and as years go by. But in the current framework, it was really focused on maybe 5 generalized areas in an attempt to create a holistic view of how the business operates and its impact in those different areas, which you might call different stakeholders. And the thought process there is that we don't do just really well in one area and ignore all of the others. So you can't just say like, hey, I made a really big donation this year, we did a good job. Don't look at all the other things that we did. Just pat us on the back because we wrote a big check, and I had a nice smile on the camera. And unfortunately, that's a lot of traditional capitalism might be done that way. Is like, we're going to do what we're going to do. We're going to write a check at the end of the year, and people are going to celebrate us for that. And we look at it through this, that every decision we make matters. Every day matters over the course of that year. And if we go through the whole year and do things the right way, if for some odd reason that we aren't hugely profitable at the end of the year, that is better than being hugely profitable and writing that check. Because what that means is that we spent dollars throughout that year appropriately. An example would be we paid responsible wages within our organization. That might be measured as not paying less than a living wage, or that might be measured by having an appropriate pay ratio between your highest and lowest paid employee. That might be measured through gender equity or other forms of equity and how payments go out. Those become the focal point throughout the year. It becomes a focal point throughout the year of just like maybe having ongoing partnerships that you're supporting financially throughout the year. Again, not just waiting to the end to kind of write that check. It involves analyzing what are the consequences of our actions and activities and how we operate. So as a tourism organization, what level of waste do we create? How are we minimizing the creation of that waste? How are we recycling that waste or composting that waste? What are we doing in the form of greenhouse gas emissions that occur from whether it's operating hotel rooms, whether it's guests on how they fly or drive down here? How do we design some of this out of the system? For an example, there's a reason we have EV charging at all of our resorts, and we cover that. That's included for free. We would love guests to drive. We'd love for them to drive EV that was already solar charged at their house or somewhere else, so they can get here without the corresponding emissions that might come from air travel. That doesn't mean that we don't have a lot of guests that do come from air travel, but we're trying to design it out of the system the best that we can. We don't own an airline, but we do have the ability to put EV charging in place here. We have the ability to put solar panels on our roofs, which we do in Florida. All of our properties now have solar in place. So these are some of the steps that we undertake in a variety of ways. Other things we do, we work with others in collective action on some of the biggest challenges we face as humanity. We clearly cannot solve by ourselves, and so we try to support other organizations together, either with other B Corps or other companies that that think alike, and that becomes a focus. Each year. It can be as simple as even in like civic education for our employees, that want to be able to understand better how they can consider voting when it's a voting cycle. And we ensure that we give paid time off vote as an example during that, because one of the main reasons employees aren't able to go vote is they can't choose between a paycheck and the right to vote. And I think it's not very appropriate for a business to place their employees in that, in that position. We think, very specific to legacy vacation resorts, also from our guests or customers' mindset. And we try to think, all right, what can we do if we think from the kind of the whole life cycle of the vacation, from when the guest learns who we are through our website all the way through their vacation with us, what touch points can we have with them that help them become a little bit more familiar with the why behind what we do? Because there's a really good chance they will carry that home with them, or they will pull that into what they're doing. Because when usually we have seen that when our guests see why we're doing it, it really resonates with them. It's not because it's not presented in a way as like there's good people and bad people. It's presented as like, this is more people focused. This is more like you. This is more like how you'd want to treat your family, your communities. We do a lot of this for you. When you spend your dollars with us, it's supporting the type of world you want to live in, not the one that you're fighting against or frustrated with. And so we have messaging throughout our properties that you'd see. We have in-room channels that a guest sees on like the default channel that pops up on the television when they come in. We do things like free water bottles at reusable water bottles at check-in, so guests aren't using single-use plastics. We don't have single-use soap and shampoos in our bathrooms. We have refillable, reusable containers. And so there's just a lot of these just different ways that we try to incorporate this in from, again, an employee standpoint, a customer standpoint, a community standpoint, or an environmental standpoint, to be holistic. A lot of which we've learned from the B Corp community. I mean, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing today if we didn't get to learn from, I think, the best companies that that exist.
Yeah, it's really so impressive and so exciting. We had Jorge Fontanez, the CEO of B Lab, US and Canada, that runs the B certification program here. And so impressive the ways in which this community is leading from the inside out, really, a transformation in how we're doing business. And now, not only are you doing what you're doing, by the way, I had the opportunity to stay at one of the legacy properties in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and loved it. Um, it was wonderful. So I can attest to the water bottles and the non-single use soaps and shampoos and so forth. Um, and you're doing so much beyond the industry of hospitality and tourism, and specifically, you're working in an industry that obviously basically touches on all other major industries and economic activities. And I want to ask you about the Climate First Bank, what you're doing there, how you helped to found the bank, and of course, as I understand it, we're in a very exciting year right now where it's about to go nationwide here in the United States, if I understood that correctly.
That is, it's been a very exciting. All the years have been exciting because it's been a really large growth. I think we are the #1 organic growing bank in the country right now, and we're almost at the 3-year mark. And it isn't just exciting that we're growing fast, but how we're growing, and the fact that we prioritize and create special loan products that help decarbonize, that draw down carbon from the atmosphere. And so I'm involved with Climate First Bank as an investor. I'm vice chair of the board of the bank and was one of the founding directors. Ken LaRoe, who's the chairman, this is the third bank that he's founded. His last bank was also a B Corp. It was First Green Bank, but ended up selling that bank. And shortly after selling it, realized, this is a mission and a purpose that I need to be carrying through in my life, and I need to do another bank at some point in time. And when it became time to be able to launch another bank, he had contacted me and asked if I wanted to be a part of it and could support it. And I knew Ken from First Green Bank and knew the work he'd done there in Central Florida, and I was all too happy to support him and try to help him move forward. And that's how it all originally started. I also knew at that point in time, when First Green Bank had left, that we had lost a bank that acted like First Green in Florida, meaning there was no other B Corp bank in Florida. There was no other bank that I knew of who had a very positive impact mission. And we needed another bank like that. And that's what Climate First Bank would be. So from even Legacy's perspective, if I kind of draw a connection between the two, we were really struggling finding someone who would finance the solar panels for our resorts. We went through a variety of evaluations and we couldn't find a cost-effective way to do it. There were all these barriers in place. And that was because, by and large, a lot of the banks just weren't that interested in that. That wasn't their focus. They were like, look, we make enough money doing other types of loans. We're not really worried about these, this type of loan type. And it was standing in the way of Legacy achieving its goal of being net zero by 2030 through renewable energy. I knew that when Climate First would be in place, that would have been a solution for us. And ultimately, it came to be a solution for us to get solar in place at our Florida properties. The other part of it was a lot of banks. Unfortunately, banks are notorious for using their deposits to fund the very industries that cause a lot of harm out there. The industries that I try to fight against on a regular basis. So knowing Climate First would be more supportive of the industries that are very positive towards people and planet, there was a desire to kind of help support that. And so we're almost 3 years into this process, been growing rapidly. It's a community-oriented bank that does traditional loans like home loans for a mortgage or a business line of credit, but it also prioritizes and specializes in loans that are renewable energy based, water minimization based, loans for nonprofits, loans for churches, loans for hospitals. And we measure that and focus on improving that monthly. So it's not, your traditional bank is probably looking at profit and loss statement and trying to say like, yep, we're more profitable or less profitable, did our loans grow or not? We go a whole nother layer and we're like, all right, what percentage of those loans went to the types of companies that are supporting the future that we want or the present that we want? And that's very important to us.
Well, it's really interesting. I want to ask you about your product mix and your anticipated future growth. But before getting to that, you mentioned something that really caught my attention when uh, first Green Bank was acquired, or there was an exit or some form of liquidity there. Did the nature of that institution essentially change? It sounds like it left a vacuum.
It did. I actually tried to work with the acquirer for a good period of time to maintain that. I was hopeful they would keep First Green as a subsidiary and would maintain the B Corp certification. I tried very hard to assist them with that, even though I wasn't involved with First Green, but it mattered enough to me to have this B Corp bank. Unfortunately, those efforts were not successful, and it ended up getting merged into the acquirer, and the acquirer basically the banking just how they do it, but not, let's just say, not the B Corp way of doing it.
Well, this brings me to what I think is, perhaps one of the, top 20 or top 30 most fundamental important questions for entrepreneurs, especially, and executives working to evolve their organizations such that the organizations have maximum positive impact across all these sectors. And the question is basically, how do you think about preventing that kind of outcome with an acquisition or some sort of exit or liquidity event? How do you think about structures and strategies that can ensure, perhaps even in perpetuity, the best in class behaviors that your companies exhibit?
It's a good question. It does vary maybe a little bit by industry and based on how many shareholders are involved. So like in Legacy Vacation Resort scenario, it's a closely held company with my wife and me. We're going to make the decisions on if we sell it or not. So if we choose to sell to a company that's going to throw away everything that we built and stand for, that's on me, for doing that. In a bank that has, can have hundreds or thousands of shareholders, obviously it can be harder because you have more shareholders that can vote in a particular way. So something that we did, we started off as a benefit corporation from day one. So it's in our legal documents, in our governance structure, who we are, what we stand for, which is very important. And it's hard to change that. You have to have a very large vote to undo benefit corporation. And that's intentional because we want it to be a legal requirement and not just a feel-good thing that you do this year because it works and next year because it doesn't work. You can't do that like I'm in, I'm out, I'm in, I'm out. Like this is a commitment that benefit corporation enables you to do. There are additional steps that others have taken to also protect that, because obviously if you sell something and you get 100% owner, usually 100% owners can change legal dynamics and governance anyway. A lot of people saw what Yvon Chouinard did in Patagonia and how they put, I don't think it was 100%, but it was well over 90% of the business into this like perpetual purpose trust. That is another sort of layer that you can put into it so that it stays there and it doesn't ultimately get sold off into others. There are other organizations that have done that. In fact, we have a swim school B Corp, Oak Aquatics, who just, I think, adopted a very similar structure to do that, to kind of maintain this purpose in place, which is phenomenal. Some of these structures are not always easy to put in place, depending on the level of capital you're trying to raise from the public, because people are going to put up money if they understand it, if they believe in it. Sometimes if things get too complicated, they just won't put money up behind it. So we did look at that as climate first. When we first went, it would have been awesome if we could have like really locked something in like perpetually. We had some concern at the time we may not raise enough money because it would have been just complicated to understand. Not because we didn't believe in people, but because we thought it would be complex. And then we would say, if we don't even get off the ground as a bank, then what good can we do? So sometimes you have to weigh that, in the process. So today we sit, it's a Florida Benefit Corporation. It's also a certified B Corporation. We're operating according to those principles with that mission. We have a very aligned board of directors who ultimately staff reports up to that builds that in. So we have a lot of layers and levels of protection that are in place, but I suppose you can never have enough of them if you really want this to go on, forever. Our next challenge certainly will be if we IPO. And I think we will IPO at some point when the time is right. And it'll be incumbent on us when we make those decisions that we do so in a way that mission can be preserved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting and very exciting. And, I'm very curious with Climate First Bank being the number one fastest growing bank from an organic growth standpoint. To whatever degree you want to, will you share with us a bit about, what's the balance sheet look like? What do you anticipate in the next, 36 months in terms of growth? And what are the main products driving this? Is it loans to hospitals and churches? Is it consumer loans for autos and homes? What's that look like?
Sure. So I think as of today, we're a little over 600 million in assets, and that started at zero. And when we get to the end of this year, it'll certainly be, I would imagine, at least $100 million more in assets than that, and it could be significantly more than that. But at least budgetarily, we'll exceed that. One of the things that will also influence that, on April 1st, we did another capital raise. It's only available right now to existing shareholders to come in, but it will be open to the public 60 days after. So is that June 1st? Shareholders can come in. And the reason I mention that is obviously when capital comes in, that grows assets. But even more important than the capital coming in is we have such a good way to deploy that capital via these loans, which grow our assets further. So we've been growing so quickly, we go through our capital because we're lending it out, which is what you're supposed to do as a bank. That's how you generate profits. So we do need to bring more capital in to maintain this rate of growth. Otherwise, you can grow, but you're constrained by principal payments coming in order to be able to lend those back out to make in order to make more loans. And then that changes if you go public because that's other capital that comes in. So that's part of what's influencing it right now. We have a lot of real estate-based loans, but all within what I would call safe limits, because that is one of the areas that a lot of times banks, if you hear, sometimes their concentrations end up going too high. So actually our real estate concentration has come down in the last probably 6 months or so, and that was intentional, on our part. Part of that, a lot of people, were paying attention to some of the banking failures that happened last year and concerns about like where do the risks lie. A lot of times people talk about that in real estate, even though all real estate isn't necessarily one and the same. Like obviously right now, people understand that office buildings represent maybe a different sort of risk because of a lot of people working remotely than into a hotel that might be, operating very well and successfully in a particular market. But we have real estate-based loans. I don't know that I can tell you off the top of my head right now how the percentages are all breaking out right now between personal and commercial, but one of our fastest areas of growth has been the solar lending. And that's partly because we have a fintech subsidiary that is part of our bank holding company called One Ethos. One Ethos has designed the software, the technology behind this lending that makes it very user-friendly for solar installers. So solar installers ultimately seek us out because we make their lives easier, to make the loan. So they go into someone's home, they quote out the project. If they're interested, they say, well, let me see if you qualify for the loan. And they can tell them right then and there, hey, you can get a loan. This is what the rate is. This is the payment terms. And what we do, and uniquely different than the traditional solar industry, is there's a large, I'll call it a kickback, a large markup that tends to happen where systems are grossly marked up so that money is paid back to the financial institution that isn't adequately disclosed to the end user. I know that sounds like, well, how's that even possible? I don't really know how that escapes the laws that are out there, but it happens. It happens regularly. We don't allow that to happen. So the rate is a rate. There's no money behind the scenes that's happening, and it's a lot more beneficial. And clearly, solar installers prefer that with us because they don't have to mark the system up another 20 to 30% and not tell the customer why it's that expensive. Because they're not saying it, so they have to pay this finder's fee or kickback, to this institution. So that has been very helpful for us in growing, the solar lending, and we see that as a continued area of growth for us, which is why the fintech is a standalone entity that will be doing this for other banks as well, not just for Climate First.
Oh, it's so interesting and wow, really amazing impact you guys are having. Congratulations on that. I have to ask one sort of nerdy question, I guess, here. I'm really curious with the products you're providing both to commercial and consumer markets. Are you holding a lot of your own paper? Are you putting things back into the secondary market through securitized instruments? What's that look like?
I would say so far we've been holding a lot of our own paper. We do have some instances where, like in the solar, interestingly, in the solar space, we have some banks that either don't have solar lending directly as a part of them, or they want to have more green type loans, you could call it. So they want to buy pools of loans from us. So that would be like another market that they would move into. So it's helping them feel like a percentage of their lending is going in a more responsible direction that they don't have to generate themselves, because they haven't built up that part of their team, or they're not as committed to it to grow that. So like, hey, it's easier if we can just buy a $100 million pool from you, or a $50 million pool from you that you already generated. So that has been happening. And then you have the traditional, when it comes to home loans, you have the traditional governmental programs that will buy those loans that probably every bank participates in. I mean, I know some banks have private mortgage pools that they will hold on to and not sell, but generally speaking, most of the mortgages they generate on residential, they end up selling off to the government.
Yeah, fascinating. A quick shout out to my dad, Dwayne Perry. When he was in his 20s, early in his career, he worked with Lou Ranieri on Wall Street when the mortgage-backed security was invented. So there's a whole rabbit hole that we won't run down there, but it's very interesting to hear how you, as a very mission-driven bank, are working with the existing systems and structures and pushing envelopes where you're able to, and clearly you're making a lot of impact already.
Yeah, an interesting thing on that, I actually don't know the answer to this on our end, and maybe it's because we're too new, but I was speaking with another responsible bank that was out there, and they were sharing how they had sold off one of their mortgages in a pool, but it ended up getting picked up by one of the larger banks that isn't as responsible. And the customer under that said, hey, I banked with you on purpose because I wanted to deal with a bank like you. I didn't want you to sell it off to this other one. And they were quick to recognize, you know what, that's a great point. We've got to do something about this. So I don't know where that ended, but you can make mistakes like that too, easily, even if it wasn't intentional, as I know it wasn't in their part, because they're a very responsible bank.
It's so interesting to hear, Jared. And I want to ask you about an organization of banks that you're part of, banks that are mission driven, the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. Could you tell us a little about what that is? Who's in that? If you want to mention a few other banks and like what's happening there worldwide.
Absolutely. So that organization spans, I think it's 71 banks around the world, in a variety of different countries. And we have a few here in the United States, a few that are in Canada, they're in Australia, they're in Sweden, they're in Germany, Uganda, Democratic Republic of the Congo. I believe there's one in the general area of Russia. And I just point out how different and dispersed they are, because they're all still able to come together under this set of values of what values-based banking is. And when you get to talk with individuals from these different banks, you learn how different it is in different parts of the world, and how hard it is to do some things that are very easy here, or vice versa. And so when we come together, we talk about banking, what we term as like the real economy. And that would be companies that really generate like this net positive activity and generating um, like things, products, and not just financial instruments that are ways to make money but don't really improve lives in the process. So we want to bank companies ideally that are improving their communities and not just improving the pocketbooks of a few shareholders, that are within there. It doesn't mean that will never happen. I mean, it's not like we're saying we don't make any loans to anyone if they don't fit that, but we measure that and we commit to like a report card on that to try to measure that with respect to where we are in the world. And it's just, I don't know, it's just fascinating how difficult it is. Some days seem hard here in the US, like right lately, just with political divisions and otherwise that we have to deal with. But I was just at the GABV, that's the acronym for it, the summit in Italy, and a bank from the Democratic Republic of the Congo is like, we basically been in war like for many, many years right now. All of our bankers are trained on how to respond should someone come into the bank, to kidnap people or to take over the bank. Like it's a regular, realistic thing that they face daily. And so like we take a lot for granted and think of how hard like some things are here, but that is not something we're dealing with. We're not dealing with what Bank of Palestine is dealing with right now. We're not so, and yet they're finding ways to maintain those values. And the exciting, I think, element I pull from that is that people can do this in some of the hardest places in the world to maintain values. We certainly can do it in a country like the United States.
Mm. Oh, that's wonderful and so inspiring. Well, for folks who would like to learn more about Global Alliance for Banking on Values, gabv.org is the website. I want to take a moment and remind our audience this is the Why on Earth Community Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron William Perry, and today we're visiting with Jared Meyers, a social entrepreneur extraordinaire and financier, leading the way on so many fronts, including as chairman of Legacy Vacation Resorts. You can find links to many of the organizations we're mentioning in our show notes, and we'll mention a few to be sure. You can connect with Jared on LinkedIn at Jared-Myers. And you can learn more about the B Corp movement at bcorporation.net. Jared mentioned One Ethos, that's oneethos.com. We didn't yet discuss 1% for the Planet, 1%fortheplanet.org. We'll get to that. And our good friend Kate Williams, who runs 1% for the Planet. We have not yet spoken either about the work you do in an organization called White Men for Racial Justice, and I'm really excited to ask you about this, Jared. Um, Before doing so, want to be sure to thank our many partners and sponsors making the Why on Earth Community Podcast possible, along with the rest of the regeneration renaissance work we're doing through the Why on Earth community and our growing global network. Specifically, big thanks to Chelsea Green Publishing. You can go to chelseagreen.com and get any and all of the books and audiobooks with a 35% discount using the code YOE35. Waylay Waters, biodynamically hemp infused aromatherapy soaking salts with regenerative farm partners here in Colorado. Profitable Purpose Consulting, a huge shout out to Nathan Stuck, who introduced us. A huge shout out to Profitable Purpose Consulting and the great work they're doing, helping many companies get B certified and maintain their B certification. A shout out to Earth Coast Productions, to Dr. Bronner's, to Patagonia, and also to our ambassadors. The Wine Earth community has a growing global network of community impact ambassadors. You too can join the CIA. And many of our ambassadors give monthly. And if you'd like to support our work and haven't yet signed up for monthly gift, you can go to whyonearth.org and set that up at any level you'd like. At the $33 level, we'll send you a jar of the Waylay water soaking salts each month to help you with your self-care practices and to give you a nice thank you in the mail. And if you like, you can also go to Patreon, Why on Earth Community at Patreon, to see a variety of additional bonuses and benefits that we've put together for you at varying levels of support. And after our main podcast interview today, we will do our customary behind the scenes segment with Jared that is available only to our ambassadors, along with many other video resources, including the recordings from our monthly meetups. And so if you'd like to join our ambassador network, just go to whyonearth.org and connect on the page called Become an Ambassador, and we'll look forward to connecting with you there. Um, a huge thanks to everybody for making this work possible and for helping us amplify the voices and the leadership that are transforming our world as we speak. So, Jared, I'm so excited to have had this opportunity to chat a bit about the work you're doing through Legacy Vacation Resorts, through the Climate First Bank, and I'm so struck by the ways you're also leading the charge in the social justice movement. And I want to ask you specifically about White Men for Racial Justice. This is WMRJ.org. What is this? Why are you a part of it? And why ought many of the rest of us consider joining as well?
Great question. So, we talked a lot about the work that I'm doing corporately, personally, but through business as a force for good. White Men for Racial Justice, to me, so I'm turning on my light, that one of the consequences of it being environmentally friendly, it doesn't see me moving in the office, and sometimes it shuts my lights off. But
Yeah.
the one of the big reasons why I'm part of it is I believe this organization helps me be more human. It was founded after George Floyd was murdered because a lot of people that looked like me were struggling with not understanding what just happened, why it might have just happened. We knew we wanted to do something, but didn't really know what to do, how to do it without creating more problems. And we just wanted to kind of learn a little bit more because we knew that it didn't feel like it was just an isolated incident that didn't have a longer history to it. And so a group came together of white men that started exploring a little bit more of the history of our country and the history of race and maybe how things have gotten to where they are today. Because it didn't just happen overnight, it happened over many different years. And we started learning in those conversations that, going back 400 years to when like slavery came here into the United States, there had been systems that had been put in place and built upon each other over years. And participating in this group really helped me understand how power is built and power is maintained. Specifically, when that power is maintained by less than a majority of people. And even more so when it's a very small percentage of that majority of people. And so as those learnings unfold, naturally you ask questions like, why? Like, why is it done this way? What are some of the reasons? And then start exploring even further all of the different ways that it kind of pervades society, maybe still. And like, where did that start? Like, now, where is it now? What happened last year? What happened the year I was born? But like, where did it start to begin with? And roll forward into the systems that exist today. And what this group helps us do is one, unlearn, because a lot of us have learned things that we thought were accurate, but weren't. Two, relearn. And then I would say three, take those new learnings to rehumanize ourselves. And especially with people that look different than us, that have different upbringings or cultural experiences than us. And there's a lot of different ways that it kind of unfolds from there. One of the ways is very specifically racial justice. trying to bring justice to those who had been disadvantaged historically by means of the construct of race or other means, but race is the big focus. The second part of it, though, is really understanding that how similar we really all are, but for privileges or advantages that we may have received over the course of our life that we're largely unaware of in many circumstances. It's kind of like it's invisible to us until it becomes visible. And then what do we want to do about that? And different people respond to that differently. Some are like, I have to fix this tomorrow, and they try to jump right into how to do that, whether that's individually or through supporting systems change at a larger level. Some people grapple with that for a long time, beat themselves up about it because they really feel bad that even if they didn't create the system and didn't put everything in place the way it is today, they realize that perhaps they're descendants of others who had, and that maybe they maintain those systems, whether intentionally or unintentionally, because they are scared of the alternative. Additional to that, though, is as I think one evolves further in, because there's obviously, it takes a while to really relearn history, engage with others, is, or at least I have learned that a lot of the stories that are told and that we tell ourselves aren't really accurate. We just don't know that because you've been told this story for so long. And so like one of the main stories that's told out there is, or the questions that gets asked is, well, doesn't racial justice mean that a lot of people that look like me are going to lose all these privileges in the world? That's not accurate. There's a perception of that being accurate. And on a personal level, I have no problem giving up many of the advantages that I have, but I'm not asking everyone else to sign up for that by being part of this. When one studies kind of how power imbalances have been maintained that don't make any sense, like when a gross majority of people have very little income and very little power in this world, there's clearly a system in place that maintains that. Because right, the natural order would be the majority tends to win unless there's these systems in place otherwise. So what would really happen if we started to dismantle some of these systems that maintain this difference is that almost everyone benefits. You know, maybe there's a very, very narrow amount that would have to adjust their lifestyles, which, by the way, wouldn't make them any less happy than they already are, because that isn't really helping them. But these changes would really help almost everyone. It would help our natural environments. And there's these stories that are maintained to be kept in place to maintain that power imbalance. And so we're told this, and a lot of us are just really busy with our daily lives and don't have the ability to look behind the curtain and do this sort of investigation. And I think that's unfortunately one of the issues, is that when people don't have time to do that, they're like, this is too, you know, sometimes this stuff can be called elitist or like too academic, because it does take you have to invest time to unlearn and to relearn. And not everyone has that time to do that. But ultimately, if we want to better ourselves in any which way we do that, it takes time, and we have to invest that time into it. So this is a way that I try to better myself, my understanding, to not be one that is being exploitive out there, that's taking advantage of benefits that have been given to me just by where I was born, who I was born to, and not for any other reason. And so this group meets every Tuesday evening, and we do it in a form to keep accountability amongst ourselves, because this isn't about white men patting themselves on the back and saying, hey, you're a good guy, nice job. It doesn't mean we don't compliment each other, you know, for doing things, because there is that community support. But a lot of it is ensuring that we continue to walk that walk. And we have Black equity advisors in there that also ensure that we're going about the work the right way, so that we're supporting, that we don't take on this, like, you know, white saviorism concept and like, well, we can fix it all, but instead that we can do it through existing organizations and people that are already out there doing this hard work, and that we are supporting them. But it's important that white men are part of this, because white men tend to still hold most of the levers of power in society, And so what we do has an outsized significance. So if people like me take actions to restore equity, to bring justice into the world, it has a greater chance of succeeding because of the power that we hold.
Wow, absolutely impressive and so commendable. Thank you for sharing this with us. I'm thinking of a couple things here. One is this is reminding me of a conversation we had with Dr. Jandel Allen Davis days after the murder of George Floyd. And she had already been on the podcast previous to that, talking about the incredible work she's doing as a service leader, as CEO of Craig Hospital in Denver, Colorado. Incidentally, she's also on the Federal Reserve Board. And is doing so much amazing work in communities all over. And of course, Dr. Allen Davis is an African American medical doctor and executive, and just an extraordinary leader. So I would encourage folks to check that episode out with Jandel that we did shortly after the murder of George Floyd. I'm also really wondering about how can more of us get involved with White Men for Racial Justice, and I mean a weekly commitment every Tuesday evening. That's not an insubstantial commitment. Is that literally a requirement to join? Is that exactly what needs to happen?
So it isn't, but there starts out with an open house so people can ask questions and get to understand if there's something they want to participate in. I don't know when the next open house date is, but they do happen throughout the year. So if someone is really interested in this, as you pointed out on LinkedIn, if someone drops me a message on this, I'll get them exactly what answers to their questions. Usually it starts with an open house, and then it starts with a learning cohort that runs maybe approximately 8 weeks. So that would be your first level of commitment. If after those 8 weeks, this isn't for them, or they feel, look, I've learned enough at this point that I can move on, that's fine as well. So it's not like a commitment that you're doing this Tuesday night forever, but there is a recurring ability to come together on Tuesday evenings, and there might actually be another time during the week that it's being done right now. I do the Tuesday evenings ones, and then the cohorts shift into either following a new book or audio podcast of sorts that helps in this educational process. Some of the things resonate more than other things. That's just like, natural. There's certain subjects that you're like, this was dead on, this is what I needed to hear. And other ones are like, okay, I follow where they're going, but maybe it doesn't hit me as much. And that's fine, like in anything that you would read or learn. So there's not a requirement on it, but it is more successful if you can stick it through at least each of those cohorts. There are breaks like during the summertime when people are traveling. So there are some, and life does get in the way. I do miss Tuesday nights, but I do try to attend as often as I can and stay in touch with the group, whether that's through WhatsApp or emails or otherwise, because it does become a community and you care about one another and you support each other through what isn't easy work. I mean, like, this is not for people that aren't willing to sign up for like a personal betterment and evolution. And the only other thing maybe I will add on that is a lot of us think this is just about like making right for what's been wrong out there. And that, while I agree that is necessary, that is not the only reason to be doing this. If anyone that wants better relationships with people, period, forget about race, forget about anything. Anyone who feels like I would like to be able to form deeper relationships with people would benefit from this, because this helps us see the differences. And as I talked about earlier, that division between us and them. So much of that, when you start seeing things in that us and them dynamic and you recognize it, you can dismantle it, you can change it, and you can realize that I actually can have a relationship with this person who I perceived as being different before I thought about it in this different perspective. And there's a lot of work that goes into that. And we just see it differently. I mean, my relationships with my colleagues at the bank, at Legacy Vacation Resorts, have substantially improved as a result of being part of White Men for Racial Justice.
Beautiful. And is it a virtual open house? Is it limited by
It is.
geography? Okay.
It is. It's Zoom. So there are people all throughout the world that do participate in it. And what ends up evolving from there, if you stay involved, is like peer circles end up getting formed. A lot of times those have a regional component because some people obviously would like to get together in person for some elements. That's usually once a month, that peer circle of, say, roughly people will get together and they'll focus on whatever they want to focus on. It doesn't have to be, the topic of that cohort, but it's usually in the form of racial justice.
Hmm. Amazing and beautiful. Wow, thank you for sharing this with us. It part of what you're talking about in the psychology of us versus them reminds me of an episode we recorded recently with Soraya Afzali from Afghanistan originally, who's stationed now in Ireland, studying um, charismatic leadership and autocracy, and how certain types of charismatic leaders will mobilize this perception of division and difference in order to gain political power, financial power. So, what's really interesting to me from a systems and human psychology and sociology standpoint is that the work you're doing at White Men for Racial Justice and the work you're doing throughout the B Corp movement globally is really working to counter those other forces that unfortunately history shows us have a way of showing up again and again and again.
100%. If we ever solve that, every other problem we have will be like, it'll be a ripple effect of positivity that happens.
Amen to that. Amen to that. May it be so. Well, I want to be sure to ask you a little bit about your athletics and what you like to do when you're recreating with your family when you're not working. And of course, we'll wrap up our main podcast interview here in just a few minutes, and then switch to our behind the scenes segment, which our ambassadors have access to. Want to remind folks to join the ambassador growing global network of ambassadors at whyonearth.org if you'd like. And before doing that, I want to ask you, so what do you and your wife and your kids like to do when you're at your various resort destinations or elsewhere traveling?
Well, one, we just like to travel because of how much we learn being in other cultures and other environments and realizing that the world isn't how we just see it, that it can be quite different. It can be better, it can be worse, and there's just so much to learn. So travel just in and of itself, of just kind of breaking down cultural barriers and understanding people is so powerful. It's one of the reasons that, like, even when we look at like, well, how do we solve for other problems of the travel ecosystem? Like planes get a lot of attack, rightfully so, because of carbon emissions. But unfortunately, without plane travel, there are parts of the world we would not be able to experience. And I would be a different person if I hadn't been to some international destinations that I've been very lucky to go to. So part of it is just that experience, being there in that community. Um, a lot of it is active travel for us. I mean, we love to hike. My kids hike a ton. They don't love it as much because they're 14 and 17. I imagine that might change in time, but my wife and I go to mountain towns a lot in the summertime, escaping Florida's heat, and just really like to get out. And outside of that, it's just I enjoy all types of sports, and my only restrictions are thanks to injuries over the years that have knocked some off the list that I would still enjoy playing. But we get to snow ski, which is very exciting. We do that in Steamboat Springs pretty often, where two of our resorts are. And then, we'll get out on the lake, we'll get out to the beaches, really just being outdoors. The more we are in nature, the more we feel that connection that is harder to sometimes experience, realizing that life has this, larger web that we're a small piece of.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And remind folks, what's the best URL to go to Legacy Vacation Resorts? I've got so many URLs on my notes here, and that one is not jumping out at me. I want to make sure we mention that to people.
So that would be Legacy Vacation Resorts, so plural.com.
Perfect. Thank you. Great. Yeah, and all of these links will be in the show notes, of course. Jared, it is such a joy to have this opportunity to visit with you today, and thank you for taking the time to be a guest on our Why on Earth community podcast. Before signing off, I want to invite you, if there's anything else you'd like to say to our audience today, please, my friend, the floor is yours.
Well, first, thank you for having me. I really appreciate getting to share all of this, because I do think a lot of people think as I do, and sometimes it's just about learning that these networks exist, that these opportunities exist. We would have had B Corp companies much sooner if I knew what they were. So, and there's a lot of people that don't know what B Corps are. So I encourage people to do their own research, learn a little bit more, and realize that there's a lot of people like me out there that just want to help you through that process. So you can join these networks. There's B local communities throughout the United States, which are regional communities of practice that are B Corps or B Corp-like companies that you could join either as an employee or on behalf of your company. Florida for Good is the one here in this region. There are also global versions of this. So B Tourism, which we're a part of, is a global travel and tourism network that spans B Corps and again, values aligned travel organizations, nonprofit, for-profit, that try to do travel the right way. And we're always offering free resources to help businesses become better and become more resilient, which will lead to their own sustainability and success over the long haul. So again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this, and I welcome all of you to join us in this movement.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Jared, for all of your leadership and making the change and impact that you're making possible.
Thank you.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.
The Why on Earth Community Stewardship and Sustainability podcast series is hosted by Aaron William Perry, author, thought leader, and executive consultant. The podcast and video recordings are made possible by the generous support of people like you. To sign up as a daily, weekly, or monthly supporter, please visit whyonearth.org/support. Support packages start at just $1 per month. The podcast series is also sponsored by several corporate and organization sponsors. You can get discounts on their products and services using the code WHYONEARTH, all one word with a Y. These sponsors are listed on the whyonearth.org/support page. If you found this particular podcast episode especially insightful, informative, or inspiring, please pass it on and share it with a friend whom you think will also enjoy it. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your support. And thank you for being a part of the Why on Earth community.